My husband brought me to the hospital gala. "Just smile and nod. You are just a housewife," he said coldly. The anonymous donor arrived in a tuxedo. He walked past the doctors, hugged me tightly, and cried, "I built this wing for you, Sarah. You were the only one who believed in me 40 years ago. I never married because of you." My husband turned pale. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, fastening the pearl necklace Wesley had given me for our 20th wedding anniversary. The pearls felt cold against my neck, each one a perfect sphere of artificial elegance. At 62, I had learned to play my role flawlessly, the devoted wife of Dr. Wesley Hartwell, one of the most respected cardiologists in the state. "Clarissa, are you ready?" Wesley's voice carried from downstairs, that familiar tone of barely concealed impatience threading through his words. "Coming, dear," I called back, taking one last look at myself. The navy blue dress he had chosen for me hung perfectly, conservative yet elegant. My graying hair was styled in the understated way he preferred, nothing too attention-grabbing. After 39 years of marriage, I knew exactly what was expected of me. The drive to St. Mary's Medical Center took 23 minutes through the tree-lined streets of our affluent neighborhood. Wesley spoke about the evening ahead, his voice taking on that lecturing tone I knew so well. "This is an important night for the hospital," he said, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel of his black Mercedes. "The anonymous donor is finally revealing himself. $50 million for the new pediatric wing. It's unprecedented." I nodded appropriately, watching the familiar streets pass by. "That's wonderful, Wesley. The children will benefit so much." "Just remember," he continued, his voice dropping to that carefully controlled tone that always made my chest tighten. "Tonight isn't about us. You're there to support me, nothing more. Smile, nod when spoken to, and let me handle any medical conversations. These people don't need to hear opinions from a housewife," I finished quietly, the words leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. Wesley glanced at me, his expression softening slightly. "I didn't mean it like that, darling. You know I respect what you do at home. But tonight is business. Professional business. You understand, don't you?" I understood perfectly. I had understood for 39 years. The hospital's grand ballroom had been transformed into something from a magazine. Golden lights cast a warm glow over burgundy velvet drapes, and the scent of fresh roses mixed with expensive perfumes filled the air. A classical quartet played softly in one corner while waiters in crisp white jackets moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. Wesley immediately fell into his element, his shoulders straightening as colleagues approached to shake his hand. I watched him transform from the controlling husband I knew at home into the charming, respected doctor everyone else saw. It was a performance I had witnessed countless times, and I knew my part in it. "Dr. Hartwell," Dr. Patricia Lennox, the chief of internal medicine, approached with her husband in tow. She was a woman I had always found intimidating, brilliant, accomplished, everything I had once dreamed of being. "Wonderful to see you both," Wesley beamed, placing a possessive hand on my lower back. "Patricia, you know my wife, Clarissa." Dr. Lennox's smile was polite but distant. "Of course. How lovely to see you again, Clarissa. Still keeping busy with your garden club activities?" The dismissal in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. I had learned to recognize these moments, when my worth was measured solely by my relationship to Wesley, when my own thoughts and opinions became irrelevant. "The garden keeps me occupied," I replied with the practiced smile I had perfected over the decades. "How nice," Dr. Lennox said, already turning her attention back to Wesley. "So tell me about your latest research. I heard you're pioneering a new approach to minimally invasive procedures." I stood there, invisible once again, as they launched into medical terminology that I actually understood but was never allowed to contribute to. The irony wasn't lost on me. 40 years ago, I would have been the one asking those questions, sharing those insights. Elena, our housekeeper, had helped me dress tonight. As she fastened the pearl necklace, she had met my eyes in the mirror with that knowing look she sometimes gave me. Elena never spoke about what she observed in our house, but her silence said everything. She had seen Wesley's subtle put-downs, his ways of making me feel small, his constant reminders of my place in his world. "Mrs. Hartwell," Elena had said softly, "you look beautiful tonight, like the smart lady I know you are." The memory of her words warmed me now as I stood surrounded by the medical elite, feeling more alone than ever. The evening progressed predictably. Wesley introduced me to colleagues and donors, always with the same phrase, "This is my wife, Clarissa. She takes wonderful care of our home." Each introduction was a gentle reminder of my limited role, my narrow importance in his grand life. I excused myself to the ladies' room, needing a moment away from the careful smiles and polite dismissals. In the marble-lined bathroom, I stared at my reflection again. When had I become this person? When had I allowed myself to shrink so small that I nearly disappeared? The woman looking back at me had kind eyes but tired ones. She wore expensive clothes and perfect makeup, but there was something hollow about her, something missing. I thought about the young woman I had been at 22, full of dreams and ambition. Sarah Margaret Thompson, that was my name then, before I became Mrs. Wesley Hartwell. Sarah had wanted to heal people, to make a difference in the world. She had earned her way into medical school through pure determination and academic excellence. But Sarah had made a choice, or rather, Sarah had been convinced to make a choice. Love, Wesley had said, was about compromise, about building a life together, about trust. "Ladies and gentlemen," the hospital administrator's voice echoed through the ballroom as I returned. "If I could have your attention, please." The crowd quieted, all eyes turning toward the small stage where a microphone had been set up. Wesley found me immediately, his hand once again claiming its familiar position on my back. "Tonight marks a historic moment for St. Mary's Medical Center," the administrator continued. "Thanks to the extraordinary generosity of our anonymous benefactor, we will be breaking ground on a state-of-the-art pediatric wing that will serve our community for generations to come." Polite applause filled the room. I found myself genuinely moved by the gesture. $50 million dedicated to helping sick children was truly remarkable. "And now," the administrator said, his smile widening, "I'm pleased to announce that our generous donor has agreed to reveal his identity tonight." The applause grew more enthusiastic. Beside me, Wesley straightened, his professional curiosity clearly piqued. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Harrison Mitchell, founder and CEO of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals." The name hit me like a physical blow. Harrison Mitchell. After 40 years, I heard that name and felt something inside my chest crack open. The crowd parted as a man in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo made his way toward the stage. He was tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from success earned rather than inherited. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch, those same intelligent, caring eyes I remembered from a lifetime ago. Wesley's hand tightened on my back, and I realized I must have made some sound, some involuntary reaction. "Do you know him?" Wesley asked quietly, his voice carrying a note I couldn't quite identify. I couldn't answer. I couldn't even breathe properly. Harrison Mitchell stood at that microphone, thanking the crowd for their support, explaining his vision for pediatric care, but all I could hear was the rushing of my own blood in my ears. He looked different, of course. 40 years would change anyone, but the essence of him, that passionate dedication, that gentle strength, remained exactly as I remembered. "The new wing," Harrison was saying, his voice carrying easily through the sound system, "will be dedicated to someone very special. Someone who taught me that healing isn't just about medicine, it's about hope, compassion, and never giving up on the people we love." I felt Wesley's curious gaze on me, but I couldn't look away from the stage. Harrison's eyes were scanning the crowd now, searching. In fact, he continued, his voice softening, that person is here tonight. And then his gaze found mine across the crowded room. Time stopped. 40 years collapsed into nothing. I saw recognition flicker in his eyes, followed by something deeper, joy, pain, longing, all mixed together in an expression that made my knees weak. He stepped away from the microphone, moving through the crowd with purpose. People stepped aside, probably thinking he was heading to greet hospital administrators or major donors. But I knew better. I knew exactly where he was going. Wesley's hand pressed harder against my back, a warning I couldn't heed even if I wanted to. Harrison walked straight to me, his eyes never leaving mine. When he reached us, he ignored Wesley entirely. He opened his arms, and without thinking, I stepped into them. The embrace was everything I remembered and nothing like I expected. Strong arms surrounded me, and for a moment, the carefully constructed world I had built around myself crumbled completely. "Sarah," he whispered against my ear, his voice thick with emotion. The name fell between us like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through everything. When he pulled back slightly, his hand still resting gently on my shoulders, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I built this wing for you, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent ballroom. "You were the only one who believed in me 40 years ago." The silence around us was deafening. I could feel Wesley's shock radiating from beside me, could sense the curious stares of everyone in the room. Harrison's voice grew stronger, more certain. "I never married because of you." Wesley's face had gone completely white. The silence that followed Harrison's words seemed to stretch forever. I stood there, caught between two worlds, the safe, suffocating life I had built with Wesley, and the passionate dreams I had buried so deep I had almost convinced myself they never existed. Wesley's grip on my arm was firm now, possessive in a way that suddenly felt less protective and more controlling. "I think there's been some mistake," Wesley said, his voice carefully modulated but carrying an edge that anyone who knew him well would recognize as danger. "My wife's name is Clarissa." Harrison's eyes never left mine as he responded. "Her name was Sarah when I knew her. Dr. Sarah Thompson, one of the most brilliant medical students I ever had the privilege to study alongside." Dr. Sarah Thompson. The name hit me like a physical blow, bringing back memories I had spent decades trying to suppress. The late nights in the medical library, the rush of understanding complex diagnoses, the dreams of saving lives and making a difference. The woman I had been before I became Mrs. Wesley Hartwell. "Sarah doesn't exist anymore," I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible even to myself. Harrison's expression softened, and for a moment, I saw past the successful businessman to the young medical student I had once known. "She does. She's standing right in front of me." The crowd around us had begun to murmur, sensing drama but not understanding its source. I could feel the weight of their stares, their curiosity, their judgment. This wasn't how I had imagined this evening would go. This wasn't how any evening was supposed to go in my carefully ordered life. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately," Wesley interjected, his professional charm back in place, but his eyes cold as ice. "I'm sure Mr. Mitchell has many people he needs to greet tonight." But Harrison wasn't backing down. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with Sarah, with Clarissa, about the position I have in mind for the new wing, as the administrative director of pediatric services." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Administrative director, a real position, a chance to return to the medical world that had once been my passion, my calling. Wesley's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "I'm afraid my wife isn't qualified for that kind of responsibility. She's been out of the medical field for, well, decades." The condescension in his voice made something inside me burn. But Harrison's next words made that burn turn into a flame. "On the contrary," Harrison said calmly. "I've followed Sarah's academic record. She graduated summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins undergraduate program. She completed 2 years of medical school before." His pause was deliberate, meaningful. Before other priorities took precedence. Other priorities. That was one way to describe it. Another way would be to say that Wesley had convinced me that love meant sacrifice, that a good wife supported her husband's career rather than pursuing her own. That trying to do both was selfish, unfair to the family we planned to build. "Medical school was a long time ago," I said quietly, though part of me wanted to scream that I still remembered every anatomy lesson, every diagnostic procedure I had learned. Things change. People change. "Do they?" Harrison asked, his voice gentle but insistent. "Or do we just convince ourselves they do to make peace with the choices we've made?" The question cut too close to the bone. I could feel Wesley's tension beside me, could sense his growing anger at this public challenge to his authority, his version of our story. "If you'll excuse us," Wesley said firmly, placing his hand on my elbow to guide me away. "My wife and I should—" "Actually," Harrison interrupted, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I was hoping to give you this." He handed me a small white card. Our fingers touched briefly as I took it, and the contact sent a jolt through me that I hadn't felt in 40 years. The card was simple. His name, a phone number, and handwritten on the back. "The door is always open. H." Wesley tried to see what was written on the card, but I closed my fingers around it instinctively. "Think about it," Harrison said, his voice meant for me alone but carrying in the stillness around us. "The children we could help, the lives we could save, the work that still needs to be done." He stepped back slightly, acknowledging Wesley for the first time with a polite nod. "Dr. Hartwell, I'm sure you understand the importance of supporting talented individuals in pursuing their calling." The irony in his words was subtle but unmistakable. Wesley's jaw tightened. "My wife's calling," Wesley said with forced civility, "has been to support my medical practice and manage our home. She's been quite successful in that role." "Has she?" Harrison asked, and something in his tone made several nearby conversations pause. "Or has she simply been accommodating?" The word hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. I felt caught between two forces, two versions of who I was supposed to be. Wesley's hand on my arm was a reminder of 40 years of carefully constructed life. Harrison's presence was a door I had thought was permanently closed. "I should get some air," I said suddenly, needing space to think, to breathe, to process what was happening. But as I started to move toward the ballroom's French doors that led to the terrace, Harrison's voice stopped me. "Sarah," he said, and the name still felt like coming home. I meant what I said, about never marrying. I turned back to face him, aware that Wesley was watching every micro-expression on my face. After we lost touch, I threw myself into my studies, then my research, then building the company. I kept telling myself I was waiting for the right person. His smile was sad, self-deprecating. But the truth was, I was waiting for you to realize you deserved better than settling for less than your dreams. Wesley stepped forward then, his professional facade cracking. "Now you listen here." "No," Harrison said calmly. "I think it's time someone listened to her." He turned to me again, his eyes intense but kind. "What do you want, Sarah? Not what anyone else wants for you. What do you want?" The question was simple and devastating. When was the last time anyone had asked me what I wanted? When was the last time I had even asked myself? I looked around the ballroom, at all these accomplished medical professionals, at the life I could have had. Then I looked at Wesley, whose face had gone red with barely contained fury at being challenged so publicly. I started, then stopped. The words felt foreign in my mouth. "She wants to go home," Wesley answered for me, his tone brooking no argument. "This has been quite enough excitement for one evening." but I didn't move. Something in Harrison's presence, in his unwavering belief that the woman I had been still existed somewhere inside me, made me hesitate. The position, I heard myself saying. What would it involve? Wesley's hand tightened on my arm, a warning. But for the first time in decades, I ignored it. Harrison's face lit up. Overseeing the integration of pediatric services between departments, working with families to coordinate care, developing programs that address not just medical needs but emotional support systems. His voice grew more passionate as he spoke. It's exactly the kind of holistic approach to medicine you used to talk about. Patient advocacy with real authority to make changes. Patient advocacy. The phrase unlocked a memory so vivid it took my breath away. I was 21, sitting in a lecture hall, taking notes on a professor's discussion of patient-centered care. I had raised my hand to ask about implementing support systems for families dealing with chronic pediatric illnesses. The professor had praised my question, said it showed the kind of thinking that would make me an excellent physician. Wesley had been in that same lecture hall that day. It was where we met, actually. He had approached me afterward, impressed by my question, charmed by my passion for helping children. At 35, he was already an established doctor, sophisticated and confident in ways that made 21-year-old me feel special, chosen. "You're wasting your time on pediatrics," he had said during one of our early dates. "Cardiology is where the real money is, the real prestige. Adults who can appreciate the complexity of what you're doing." But it had never been about money or prestige for me. It had been about the children. "I'd have to think about it," I said finally, my voice stronger than I expected. Wesley's grip on my arm became almost painful. "Clarissa, we need to discuss this privately." "Yes," Harrison said, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, but don't think too long. Sometimes opportunities have expiration dates." He nodded politely to Wesley, then turned to me one last time. "It was good to see you again, Sarah. Really good." As he walked away, disappearing back into the crowd of admirers and medical colleagues, I realized I was trembling. The business card felt like it was burning in my palm. Wesley guided me toward the exit with firm determination, nodding curtly to people who tried to engage us in conversation. The drive home was silent except for the sound of his breathing, which grew more controlled and measured with each mile, a sure sign of the storm building inside him. Our house on Magnolia Heights Drive looked exactly as it had when we left, perfectly manicured, impressively large, and somehow cold despite its warm lighting. Elena had left a single lamp on in the living room, a habit she had developed over the years to make our homecomings feel less stark. It wasn't until we were inside, the door closed and locked behind us, that Wesley finally spoke. "What the hell was that about?" I set my purse down carefully on the marble entryway table, buying myself time. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't." His voice was sharp now, all pretense of civility abandoned. "Don't insult my intelligence, Clarissa. You know exactly what I mean." I turned to face him, seeing clearly for the first time in years the man I had married. The charm was gone, replaced by something harder, more calculating. "Harrison Mitchell is someone I knew in medical school," I said carefully, "before we met. Harrison Mitchell, who just happens to be worth $800 million, and just happened to donate $50 million to the hospital where I work." Wesley's laugh was bitter. How convenient that he never mentioned this connection during all the preliminary meetings. Maybe because there's nothing to mention. Nothing to mention? Wesley stepped closer, his voice dropping to that carefully controlled tone that I had learned to recognize as dangerous. "He called you Sarah. He said he built a hospital wing for you. He offered you a job, and you stood there like what, Wesley? Like you were considering it." The accusation hung between us, because the truth was, I had been considering it. For just a moment, standing in that ballroom, I had allowed myself to imagine a different life. A life where my opinions mattered, where my intelligence was valued, where I was more than just someone's wife. It was a surprise, I said finally. I hadn't seen him in 40 years. But you knew he was successful. No, don't lie to me. Wesley's voice was getting louder now, his control slipping. You don't react the way you reacted tonight to someone you barely remember. You don't light up like that for a casual acquaintance. Light up? Had I lit up? I thought about Harrison's presence, the way it had felt to be seen, really seen, by someone who remembered who I used to be. I was surprised, I repeated. That's all? Wesley stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face for something I couldn't identify. Then, abruptly, he turned and walked to the bar cart in the living room. 40 years, he said, pouring himself 3 fingers of scotch. 40 years I've given you everything. A beautiful home, financial security, social standing. I've protected you, provided for you. Never asked for anything more than loyalty. Loyalty. The word sat strangely in the air between us. And I've been loyal, I said quietly. Have you? He turned back to face me, glass in hand. Because tonight, standing there in front of half the medical community, it sure didn't look like loyalty. It looked like a woman who was ready to throw away everything we've built for the fantasy of what might have been. That's not... He offered you a job, Clarissa. A job you're not qualified for. A job you haven't worked toward. A job you couldn't possibly handle after spending 40 years as a housewife. Each word was precisely chosen to cut. Did you really think no one would notice how inappropriate that was? How it made me look? How it made him look. Not how it made me feel to be dismissed, belittled, reduced to my marital status in front of a room full of professionals. How it made him look. Maybe I could handle it, I said. The words surprising me as much as they seemed to surprise Wesley. He actually laughed. Handle it? Clarissa, you haven't worked outside this house in decades. You've never managed a budget larger than our household expenses. You've never supervised staff or handled administrative responsibilities. What makes you think you could walk into a major medical center and run a department? Each question felt like a small slap, designed to remind me of my limitations, my narrow world, my lack of qualifications for anything beyond the life he had chosen for me. But something inside me, something that had been sleeping for 40 years, stirred to life. I completed 2 years of medical school, I said quietly. I had a 4.0 grade average. I was offered research positions that I turned down to marry you. Wesley's expression hardened. Medical school was 40 years ago. The field has completely changed. You'd be lost in a week. Would I? Yes. And more importantly, you'd embarrass yourself. And me. He took a long sip of his scotch, watching me over the rim of the glass. Is that really what you want? To make a fool of yourself chasing some middle-aged fantasy because an old flame showed up with more money than sense? The card in my palm seemed to pulse with possibility, but Wesley's words were designed to make that possibility feel shameful, unrealistic, foolish. I wasn't chasing anything, I said. I was just listening. Well, stop listening. And throw away whatever he gave you. We stared at each other across our beautiful, cold living room. Outside, I could hear the wind rustling through the magnolia trees that gave our street its name. Inside, the grandfather clock marked the seconds with mechanical precision. I think I'll go to bed, I said finally. Wesley nodded, already turning back to his scotch. Good. And Clarissa? Tomorrow we're going to forget this entire evening happened. We're going to go back to our normal life and pretend that man never walked into that ballroom. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand trailing along the mahogany banister Wesley was so proud of. In our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally opened my palm to look at Harrison's card again. The door is always open. But as I sat there in the darkness of my beautiful, empty bedroom, I wondered if some doors, once closed, could ever really be opened again. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside Wesley, listening to his measured breathing, turning Harrison's business card over and over in my fingers until the edges were soft from handling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face at the gala, older, distinguished, but with the same passionate intensity I remembered from our medical school days. Sarah Margaret Thompson. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 40 years, but hearing it had awakened something in me that I thought was dead and buried. When dawn finally crept through our bedroom curtains, I slipped quietly out of bed and padded down to the kitchen. Elena wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours, and Wesley never came downstairs before 7:30. For once, I had the house to myself. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at our granite kitchen island, staring out at the garden I had spent years perfecting. Every flower, every shrub, every carefully planned border was a testament to the life I had built with Wesley. Beautiful, controlled, and ultimately, empty. The coffee was bitter, or maybe that was just the taste of regret in my mouth. I found myself remembering things I had forced myself to forget. Like the way Harrison used to study, completely focused, but always ready to help anyone who was struggling. He had this gift for explaining complex concepts in ways that made them crystal clear. More than once, he had helped me through particularly difficult anatomy or pharmacology problems, but it was more than his academic brilliance that had drawn me to him. Harrison genuinely cared about his future patients in a way that went beyond textbook knowledge. He would stay after lectures to ask professors about cutting-edge research, not to show off, but because he was genuinely passionate about finding better ways to heal people. Wesley, even then, had been different. Polished, confident, already thinking like an established doctor rather than a student still learning. When he approached me after that lecture on patient-centered care, he hadn't been interested in discussing the medical concepts. He had been interested in me. "You're wasting your passion on pediatrics," he had told me during our third date, as we sat in an expensive restaurant I never could have afforded on my student budget. Children can't appreciate the complexity of medical intervention the way adults can. There's no intellectual challenge there. I had tried to explain that it wasn't about intellectual challenge for me. It was about helping the most vulnerable patients, the ones who couldn't advocate for themselves. But Wesley had smiled that indulgent smile and changed the subject. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled me back to the present. Wesley appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in his perfectly pressed shirt and tie, his silver hair styled exactly the way it had been for the past 20 years. "You're up early," he observed, moving toward the coffee maker. "Couldn't sleep." He poured his coffee with the same precise movements he brought to everything in his life. "I'm not surprised. Last night was challenging." Challenging. That was one word for it. Wesley sat across from me at the island, his expression carefully neutral. "I've been thinking about what happened at the gala, about your reaction to seeing that man." "Harrison," I said quietly. "His name is Harrison." Wesley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, Harrison Mitchell. I did some research this morning." Of course he had. Wesley never left anything to chance, never entered any situation without gathering all available information. "He's quite successful," Wesley continued, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. "Built Mitchell Pharmaceuticals from nothing after completing his residency. Never married, no children. Devoted his entire life to his work." The way he said it made it sound like a character flaw, a life half-lived. "Obsessive personalities often struggle with personal relationships," Wesley added, taking a sip of his coffee. "Too focused on their own ambitions to really invest in other people." I said nothing, but something inside me bristled at his characterization of Harrison. The man I remembered had been anything but obsessive or selfish. He had been driven, yes, but always in service of something larger than himself. "I also made some calls about this supposed job offer," Wesley continued. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. "What kind of calls?" "I spoke with Dr. Patterson, the hospital administrator. Apparently, Mr. Mitchell did mention wanting to hire someone to oversee the integration of pediatric services, but it was just a passing comment. Nothing official, nothing concrete. Certainly not the kind of position someone with your background could realistically handle. Each word was chosen carefully, designed to deflate any hope I might have harbored about Harrison's offer being real. My background, I repeated softly. Clarissa, I don't mean to be harsh, but we need to be realistic. You haven't worked in a professional environment in decades. You've never managed a staff, never dealt with hospital politics, never handled the kind of regulatory compliance issues that come with administering medical services. His voice was gentle now, the tone he used when he thought he was protecting me from harsh realities. It would be setting yourself up for failure. Maybe, I said, but something in me pushed back. Or maybe I'm more capable than you think. Wesley set his coffee cup down with a sharp clink. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm not the same person I was at 23. I've spent 40 years managing our household, our finances, our social obligations. I've organized charity events, coordinated with contractors, handled complex scheduling. I'm not some helpless child, Wesley. The word surprised both of us. I hadn't intended to sound so defensive, so assertive. Wesley stared at me for a long moment. Of course you're capable. I never said you weren't. But there's a difference between managing a household and running a medical department. The liability alone would be enormous. One mistake could destroy both our reputations. Both our reputations. Not my reputation, not my risk, but ours. As if my potential failure would somehow reflect on him. What if I didn't fail? I asked quietly. Clarissa, what if I was good at it? What if I actually had something valuable to contribute? Wesley's expression hardened. Is this really what you want? To throw away 40 years of marriage to chase some fantasy job that probably doesn't even exist? I'm not throwing away anything. I'm just thinking. About what? About him? Wesley leaned forward, his voice dropping to that controlled tone that always made me nervous. Because if this is about rekindling some college romance, it's not about Harrison, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. It's about me, about who I am, who I might have been. You are my wife. You are the woman I've loved and provided for 40 years. Isn't that enough? The question hung between us like a challenge. Was it enough? Had it ever been enough? I need some air, I said, standing abruptly. I think I'll work in the garden for a while. Wesley nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Just promise me you'll think carefully before you do anything rash. We have a good life, Clarissa. Don't let one evening of nostalgia destroy what we've built. I walked outside into my carefully tended garden, breathing in the scent of jasmine and morning dew. This had always been my sanctuary, the one place in our house that was entirely mine. Wesley never showed any interest in gardening, so he had given me free rein to design and maintain it however I wanted. Sitting on the stone bench I had positioned beneath the old oak tree, I pulled Harrison's business card from my pocket and studied it again. The paper was expensive, simple, elegant, professional, but not ostentatious. I found myself wondering what his life had been like for the past 40 years. Wesley made it sound like Harrison had lived some kind of sterile, lonely existence, too focused on work to build meaningful relationships. But what if that wasn't true? What if Harrison had simply chosen a different path, one that allowed him to pursue his passions without compromise? My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text message from an unknown number. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I got your number from the hospital directory. I wanted to apologize if I put you in an awkward position last night. That wasn't my intention. I just wanted you to know that the offer I made was completely serious. If you'd like to discuss it further, I'll be in town for the next few days. No pressure, just conversation between old friends. Harrison. I read the message 3 times, my heart racing. He had called me Sarah again, and he was serious about the job offer. I started to type a response, then stopped, then started again. Harrison, it was good to see you too. The offer is unexpected. I'm not sure what to think. I deleted that and tried again. I appreciate you reaching out. Last night was overwhelming. Delete. Thank you for the message. I would like to talk. My finger hovered over the send button for a full minute before I pressed it. His response came within seconds. Would you like to have coffee this afternoon? There's a small cafe called Rosemary's on Elm Street. Very quiet, very private. 2 o'clock? I knew Rosemary's. It was a little independent coffee shop in the Arts District. The kind of place Wesley would never think to look for me. The kind of place where two old friends could have a conversation without becoming the subject of gossip. I'll be there, I typed before I could change my mind. After I sent the message, I sat in my garden for a long time, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Part of me felt guilty, like I was betraying Wesley by agreeing to meet Harrison. But a larger part of me felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. For the first time in decades, I was about to do something entirely for myself. When I finally went back inside, Wesley had already left for the hospital. Elena was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared what looked like his favorite breakfast casserole for tomorrow morning. "Good morning, Mrs. Hartwell," she said with her usual warm smile. "You're looking thoughtful today." Elena had worked for us for 15 years. In that time, she had witnessed countless small interactions between Wesley and me, had seen the way he spoke to me, the way he made decisions about our life without consulting me. She never said anything directly, but sometimes I caught her watching me with an expression that seemed almost protective. "Elena," I said impulsively, "what do you think about people who make big changes later in life?" She paused in her food preparation, considering the question seriously. "I think life is too short to spend it being someone you're not," she said finally. My grandmother. She was 65 when she left my grandfather and moved to Mexico to open a restaurant. Everyone said she was crazy, too old, too late. But she lived 15 more happy years doing what she loved. "Weren't you worried about her, making such a big change so late?" Elena smiled. "I was more worried about what would happen if she didn't make the change. Sometimes staying is scarier than leaving, you know?" Her words stayed with me as I went upstairs to shower and change. Standing in my walk-in closet, surrounded by the carefully chosen wardrobe Wesley preferred, understated, elegant, age-appropriate, I found myself reaching for something different. Instead of my usual conservative blouse and slacks, I chose a soft blue sweater that brought out my eyes and a pair of jeans I rarely wore. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw attention, but something that felt more like me. As I was getting dressed, my eyes fell on a box tucked away on the top shelf of the closet. I had to use the step stool to reach it, but when I opened it, I found exactly what I was looking for. My medical school textbooks. I had saved them when we moved into this house 40 years ago, telling Wesley I might want to reference them someday. He had rolled his eyes and said it was silly to keep outdated medical texts, but he had allowed me to store them in the attic. At some point over the years, I had moved them to my closet, though I couldn't remember exactly when or why. I pulled out my old anatomy text and flipped through pages I had once known by heart. My own handwriting filled the margins, notes, questions, insights I had recorded as a 20-year-old student, passionate about learning everything I could about the human body. The young woman who had written those notes seemed like a stranger to me now. She had been so confident, so certain of her purpose, so unafraid to ask questions and challenge assumptions. What had happened to her? I knew the answer, of course. She had fallen in love with a charming, established doctor who had convinced her that love meant sacrifice. That a good wife supported her husband's career rather than pursuing her own. That trying to do both was selfish. But sitting there with my old textbook in my hands, I wondered if that young woman was really gone, or if she was just buried beneath 40 years of carefully learned helplessness. At 1:45, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, applying lipstick with hands that trembled slightly. I looked different somehow. Not younger, exactly, but more present, more alive. As I was leaving the house, Elena called out from the kitchen. "Mrs. Hartwell, you look beautiful today, like yourself." Like myself. When was the last time anyone had said that to me? The drive to Rosemary's Cafe took 12 minutes through tree-lined streets I rarely traveled. This part of town was more bohemian than our neighborhood, with art galleries and independent shops, and people who looked like they had chosen their own paths rather than following predetermined scripts. I found a parking spot across from the cafe and sat in my car for a moment, gathering courage. Through the large windows, I could see Harrison already seated at a corner table, reading what looked like a medical journal. Even after 40 years, he still had that same focused intensity I remembered. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked across the street. The bell above the cafe door chimed as I entered, and Harrison looked up immediately. His face lit up with a smile that was both familiar and completely new. "Sarah," he said, standing to greet me. "Thank you for coming." As he pulled out my chair, I realized that Wesley had never done that, never treated me with that kind of thoughtful courtesy. "I wasn't sure I would," I admitted as I sat down. "But you did. That says something." The barista came over to take our order. A latte for me, black coffee for Harrison. Some things apparently never changed. When we were alone again, Harrison leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but kind. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Last night, I let my emotions get the better of me. I shouldn't have put you in such an awkward position in front of your husband and all those people." "You were honest," I said quietly. "That's not something I'm used to." Something flickered across his face. Concern, maybe, or understanding. "Tell me about your life, Sarah. The real version, not the public one." The question was so simple, so direct, that it caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had asked me about my life, about what I wanted, what I thought, what I felt? "I don't know if there is a real version anymore," I said finally. "I've been Mrs. Wesley Hartwell for so long. I'm not sure who Sarah is." "She's sitting right across from me," Harrison said gently. "I can see her." And somehow, impossibly, I believed him. Sitting across from Harrison in that quiet cafe, I felt something inside me unfurling, something that had been tightly wound for 40 years. The afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting gentle shadows across his face, and for a moment, I could see both the young medical student I had known and the successful man he had become. "I want to show you something," Harrison said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table between us. The architectural plans for the pediatric wing. I hesitated before opening the folder. Looking at these plans would make this real, would move it beyond the realm of impossible fantasy into something concrete and terrifying. "Go ahead," Harrison encouraged gently. "I designed it with you in mind." The blueprints were beautiful, more than beautiful, they were revolutionary. Instead of the sterile, intimidating medical environment I expected, these plans showed warm, welcoming spaces with natural light, family areas integrated into treatment rooms, and what looked like play spaces woven throughout the clinical areas. "This section here," Harrison pointed to a cluster of rooms near the main entrance, "is what I envision as the Family Advocacy Center, a place where someone could coordinate care between departments, help families navigate the system, ensure that no child falls through the cracks." As he talked, his passion was evident. This wasn't just a building project for him. This was a vision of healing that went beyond medical intervention to encompass the whole human experience of illness and recovery. "It's exactly what you used to talk about in school," he continued. "Remember that paper you wrote on integrative pediatric care? About treating the child and the family as a unit, rather than just focusing on the diagnosis?" I did remember. I had spent weeks researching that paper, interviewing families, observing in pediatric wards. It had been one of the proudest academic achievements of my young life. Wesley said that paper was a waste of time, I found myself saying. He said I was being too emotional about medicine, that successful doctors needed to maintain professional distance. Harrison's expression darkened slightly. Professional distance has its place, but medicine without compassion isn't medicine. It's just technical repair work. I traced my finger along the architectural lines, seeing in them everything I had once dreamed of accomplishing. This is incredible, Harrison. But I don't understand why you think I could run something like this. Because you already know how to do everything this position would require, he said simply. You know how to listen to people, how to coordinate complex schedules, how to advocate for what's right even when it's not convenient. You've been doing it for 40 years. You just haven't been getting paid for it. His words hit something deep inside me. All those years of organizing Wesley's professional life, managing our household staff, coordinating his complex schedule of surgeries and conferences and social obligations. It had been like running a small business, but I had never thought of it that way. There's something else, Harrison said, his voice growing quieter. Something I need to tell you about why I really built this wing. I looked up from the plans, sensing a shift in his mood. After we lost touch, I threw myself into my studies, graduated at the top of my residency class, got accepted into a prestigious fellowship program. I told myself I was moving on, building the career we had both dreamed of. He paused, staring out the cafe window. But every patient I treated, every research project I undertook, every business decision I made, part of me was thinking about what you would say, how you would approach the problem. Harrison, let me finish, he said gently. I never married because I kept comparing everyone to you. Not to who you were at 22, but to who I knew you could become, the brilliant, compassionate doctor you were meant to be. The confession hung between us, heavy with 40 years of what-ifs and might-have-beens. You can't build a life around someone who doesn't exist anymore, I said softly. But you do exist. You're sitting right here. His eyes met mine, intense and certain. Sarah, I've spent 4 decades building something I hoped would be worthy of the woman who believed I could change the world when I was just a struggling medical student. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone. It's not pressure. It's possibility. Harrison reached across the table and gently touched my hand. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to remember who you are. His touch sent a jolt through me, not of attraction exactly, but of recognition. The feeling of being seen, really seen, by someone who remembered when I had dreams of my own. Tell me about the job, I said, needing to focus on something concrete, something manageable. Harrison's face lit up. The administrative director position would involve coordinating care between pediatric subspecialties, developing family support programs, and overseeing the integration of new services. You'd work directly with department heads to ensure seamless patient experiences. As he described the role, I found myself mentally organizing the challenges, thinking through solutions, feeling that old excitement of tackling complex problems. The salary would be $150,000 annually to start, Harrison continued, with full benefits and opportunities for advancement based on performance. $150,000. I tried to process that number. Wesley gave me a monthly allowance of $2,000 for personal expenses, treating it like generous largesse. The idea of earning my own salary, having my own financial independence, was both thrilling and terrifying. What about my lack of recent experience? I asked. That's why we'd start with a 6-month trial period. You'd shadow the current interim director, attend department meetings, get familiar with hospital systems. No pressure, no permanent commitment unless we're both confident it's working. A trial period. A chance to dip my toe in the water without diving off a cliff. I'd need to think about it, I said, though part of me wanted to say yes immediately. Of course. But Sarah, there's something else you should know. Harrison's expression grew serious. I did some research after I saw you last night. I wanted to understand what happened after medical school, how you ended up where you are. My stomach tightened. What kind of research? I still have contacts at Johns Hopkins. I asked about your academic record. His jaw tightened slightly. Did you know that you were accepted into the pediatric residency program at Children's Hospital? Full funding. Fast track to attending physician status. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's not. Wesley said I wasn't accepted anywhere. He said my grades weren't strong enough for competitive programs. Harrison's eyes filled with something like anger. Your grades were excellent. Top 5% of your class. The residency director specifically mentioned you as one of the most promising candidates they'd seen. The cafe seemed to spin around me. But I never got an acceptance letter. The letters were sent to your home address, the same address where you were living with Wesley after your engagement. Understanding crashed over me like a wave. Wesley had intercepted my acceptance letters. He had lied to me about my prospects, convinced me that my medical career was a dead end, also that I would choose marriage over my dreams. "Oh my God," I whispered. Harrison leaned forward, concern clear on his face. "I'm sorry. I debated whether to tell you. But I thought you deserved to know. He lied to me." The words came out flat, emotionless, because the full weight of the betrayal was too large to process all at once. For 40 years, he let me believe I wasn't good enough. "Sarah!" He stole my life. My voice was getting louder, and other cafe patrons were starting to glance in our direction. He deliberately sabotaged my career and then spent 4 decades making me feel grateful for the sacrifice. Harrison reached across the table and took my hand again, his touch steady and grounding. "I know this is devastating. I know it changes everything. But it also means something important. You were never the failure he convinced you that you were." I stared down at his hand covering mine, trying to absorb the magnitude of what I had just learned. All those years of Wesley's subtle put-downs, his reminders that I wasn't qualified for professional work, his insistence that he was protecting me from a world I couldn't handle, all of it built on a foundation of lies. "What do I do with this information?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's up to you. But Sarah, you have options now. You have proof that you were never meant to be just someone's wife. You were meant to be a doctor, a healer, someone who makes a difference in the world." The weight of possibility was almost overwhelming. For 40 years, I had accepted Wesley's version of events, his explanation of why my dreams had to be sacrificed for our marriage. But if he had been lying, if I had been capable all along. "I need to go," I said suddenly, standing up from the table. "I need to think about this." Harrison stood as well, his expression understanding. "Of course. But Sarah, whatever you decide, please don't let fear make the choice for you. You've been controlled by other people's limitations for too long." As I gathered my purse, my hands shaking slightly, Harrison pulled out another card and placed it on the table. "This has my personal cell phone number," he said. "Call me if you want to talk, day or night. And if you decide you want to tour the hospital, see what we're building, the offer stands." I picked up the card, noting the difference between this one and the business card he had given me the night before. This one was handwritten, more personal, more intimate. "Thank you," I managed to say. "For the coffee, for the honesty, for everything. Thank you for coming. For giving me a chance to explain?" He paused, then added softly, "It's been 40 years since I've felt this hopeful about anything." The drive home passed in a blur of emotions. Anger at Wesley's betrayal. Grief for the life I might have had. Fear about what I was supposed to do with this information. But underneath it all, something else was growing. A tiny flame of possibility that had been extinguished for so long I had forgotten it ever existed. When I pulled into our driveway, Wesley's car was already there. He never came home before 6 o'clock unless something was wrong. I found him in his study, seated behind his mahogany desk with papers spread in front of him. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. "Yes," I agreed, though I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever this conversation would bring. "We do." Wesley gestured to the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I had sat for 40 years of discussions about household matters, social obligations, and the business of our life together. But this time, something was different. This time, I had information he didn't know I possessed. "I've been making some inquiries about your friend Mr. Mitchell," Wesley began, his tone carefully neutral, "about his business practices, his reputation in the medical community." "Harrison is highly respected," I said. "His company has developed some of the most important pediatric medications of the past 2 decades. Wesley raised an eyebrow at my use of Harrison's first name. "Yes, he's been successful. But success doesn't always indicate good judgment in personal matters." "What does that mean?" "It means that a man who builds a $50 million hospital wing for a woman he knew 40 years ago might not be making rational decisions." Wesley leaned forward, his expression becoming more intense. "Clarissa, I'm concerned that he's manipulating your emotions to serve his own agenda." "And what agenda would that be?" "Think about it. He's never married, never had a family of his own. He sees you now, a beautiful, accomplished woman, and suddenly all those old feelings come rushing back. The job offer, the grand gestures, the implication that your marriage somehow held you back. It's all designed to make you question the life we've built together." Wesley's words were smooth, logical, designed to make Harrison seem unstable and predatory rather than genuine. But after what I had learned this afternoon, his manipulation tactics were suddenly transparent. "What if he's not manipulating me?" I asked quietly. "What if he's telling the truth?" Wesley's expression hardened slightly. "The truth about what?" "About who I was. About what I was capable of." I paused, gathering courage. "About what really happened with my medical school applications." For just a moment, Wesley's careful composure slipped. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or fear. "Your medical school applications were decades ago, Clarissa. Why would you bring that up now?" "Because I found out something interesting today." I leaned forward, watching his face carefully. "I found out that I was accepted into the pediatric residency program at Children's Hospital. Full funding. They called me one of their most promising candidates." Wesley went very still. "That's impossible. You weren't accepted anywhere." "The letters were sent to our home address, the same home where you collected the mail every day while I was finishing my final semester." The silence stretched between us, heavy with accusation and the weight of 40 years of lies. "Clarissa," Wesley said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "I think you're misremembering." "I'm not misremembering anything." My voice was steady now, certain. "You intercepted those letters. You lied to me about my prospects. You convinced me that my only option was to give up medicine and marry you." Wesley stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked our perfectly manicured backyard. "Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, it doesn't change the fact that you had a choice. You chose to marry me. You chose to build this life. I chose based on false information. Information you deliberately withheld from me." He turned back to face me, and for the first time in our 40 years of marriage, I saw him as he really was. Not the distinguished doctor, not the protective husband, but a man who had built his happiness on the ruins of someone else's dreams. "We have a good life, Clarissa," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "A beautiful home, financial security, social standing. Would you really throw all that away for some fantasy of what might have been?" "It's not a fantasy," I said, standing to face him. "It's who I was meant to be." Wesley stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating, trying to find the right words to regain control of the situation. "Even if you could get this job, he said finally. Do you really think you could handle it? You haven't worked in a professional environment for 4 decades. You'd be starting over at 62, competing with people half your age who have been building their careers while you've been here. Each word was designed to undermine my confidence, to remind me of my limitations, to make me afraid of failing. But for the first time in 40 years, I didn't believe him. Maybe I would fail, I said quietly. But maybe I wouldn't. And for the first time in my life, I think I deserve the chance to find out. Wesley's face went pale, and I realized that he was finally beginning to understand that the woman who had spent 40 years accepting his version of reality was gone. That night, I lay in bed beside Wesley, but neither of us slept. The space between us felt like an ocean, vast, cold, and impossible to cross. He had tried to continue the conversation after my declaration in his study, but I had walked away. For the first time in our marriage, I had simply turned my back on him and left the room. Now, in the darkness, I could feel him watching me, calculating his next move. Wesley had never been a man who accepted defeat easily, especially when it came to controlling the narrative of our life together. Clarissa, he said finally, his voice cutting through the silence. We need to resolve this. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to hear whatever strategy he had devised to pull me back into compliance. I know you're angry, he continued, and maybe you have a right to be. Maybe I did make some decisions about your career without consulting you, but I was protecting you, protecting us, protecting. The word that had defined our marriage for 40 years. Wesley the protector, me the protected. Him making the hard choices so I didn't have to face harsh realities. Medical school would have been brutal for you, he said, his voice taking on that reasonable, caring tone he used when he wanted to seem wise rather than controlling. The competition, the hours, the pressure. I saw what it did to people, how it destroyed relationships, how it consumed lives. I couldn't bear to watch that happen to you. I turned over to face him in the darkness, seeing his profile outlined by the moonlight filtering through our bedroom curtains. That wasn't your choice to make, I said quietly. Wasn't it? We were engaged. We were planning a life together. Doesn't partnership mean making decisions that benefit both people, not just one? The argument was so perfectly crafted, so reasonable sounding, that for a moment I almost believed it. This was Wesley's gift. The ability to make his selfishness sound like sacrifice, his control seem like care. But I had spent the afternoon with someone who had known me when I was strong, when I was capable, when I believed I could change the world. Harrison's faith in who I used to be had awakened something in me that Wesley's carefully constructed reality couldn't touch. What if I had succeeded? I asked. What if medical school had been challenging but not impossible? What if I had thrived? Wesley was quiet for a long moment. But you might not have. And failure would have devastated you. So you made sure I never had the chance to find out. I made sure you never had to risk everything on an uncertain outcome. His voice grew softer, more intimate. Clarissa, I loved you. I wanted to build a life with you. Medical school would have delayed that for years, maybe made it impossible. We would have been apart during your residency, struggling financially, never seeing each other. Is that really what you wanted? The question hung between us, and I realized he was still doing it, still trying to convince me that his version of events was the only reasonable one, that my dreams had been naive fantasies that would have led to disappointment. But I remembered the young woman who had written those careful notes in her medical textbooks, who had stayed up all night studying because she was passionate about learning how to heal people. That woman hadn't been naive. She had been focused, determined, capable of handling whatever challenges came her way. I'll never know what I wanted, I said finally, because you didn't give me the choice. Wesley sighed, the sound heavy with what seemed like genuine regret. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should have told you about the acceptance letters, let you decide for yourself. But Clarissa, that was 40 years ago. We can't change the past. We can only decide what to do with the future. Yes, I agreed. We can. Something in my tone must have warned him, because Wesley sat up slightly, trying to see my face in the darkness. What does that mean? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything between us irrevocably. It means I'm going to take the job Harrison offered me. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock chiming midnight downstairs. You can't be serious, Wesley said finally. I'm completely serious. Wesley turned on the bedside lamp, flooding our bedroom with harsh light. His face was a mixture of disbelief and anger, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Clarissa, you're 62 years old. You haven't worked outside this house in 4 decades. You have no experience with hospital administration, no understanding of medical politics, no idea what you'd be walking into. Then I'll learn. You'll embarrass yourself, and me. His voice was getting louder now, losing the controlled tone he usually maintained. Do you have any idea what people will say? That my wife is having some kind of midlife crisis, chasing after an old lover, making a fool of herself trying to reclaim her lost youth? Let them talk. Wesley stared at me as if I had become someone he didn't recognize. This isn't you, Clarissa. This isn't who you are. No, I said, sitting up to face him directly. This is exactly who I am. You just spent 40 years making sure I forgot. Wesley got out of bed, pacing to the window and back, his agitation obvious. This is about him, isn't it? About Harrison Mitchell. He's manipulating you, using your emotions to get what he wants. And what does he want, Wesley? What could he possibly gain from offering me a job? Revenge, Wesley said immediately. Revenge against me for marrying you, against you for choosing me over him. He wants to destroy our marriage as payback for losing you 40 years ago. The accusation was so absurd, so clearly a projection of Wesley's own manipulative tendencies onto Harrison, that I almost laughed. Or maybe, I said calmly, he just believes I'm capable of doing good work. Based on what? A conversation you had as college students? A few minutes at a hospital gala? Wesley's voice was becoming increasingly desperate. Clarissa, successful people don't make $50 million decisions based on nostalgia. There has to be an ulterior motive. Maybe his ulterior motive is wanting to work with someone who shares his vision for pediatric care. Maybe it's wanting to give talented people opportunities they deserve. Maybe not everything is a conspiracy. Wesley stopped pacing and stared at me. You really believe that, don't you? You actually think you can walk into one of the most prestigious medical centers in the country and succeed in a senior administrative position with no relevant experience? I don't know if I can succeed, I said honestly. But I know I want to try. And if you fail, if you crash and burn spectacularly, what then? Then I'll deal with the consequences, like an adult. The words hit their target. Wesley flinched, recognizing his own tendency to treat me like a child who couldn't handle difficult realities. What about us? He asked finally, his voice quieter now. What about our marriage? It was the question I had been dreading, the one I didn't have a good answer for. I don't know, I admitted. But I know I can't keep living the way we've been living. I can't keep pretending that being protected is the same thing as being loved. Wesley sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking older than his 67 years. I do love you, he said softly. Maybe I haven't always shown it the right way, but everything I've done has been because I love you. I know you believe that, I said gently. But love doesn't steal someone's choices from them. Love doesn't require one person to disappear so the other can shine. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of 40 years of accumulated misunderstandings settling between us. So what happens now? Wesley asked finally. Now I call Harrison and tell him I accept his offer. I start the trial period and see if this is something I can actually do. And if I ask you not to? If I tell you this will destroy our marriage? I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not the distinguished doctor or the controlling husband, but a man who was genuinely afraid of losing the life he had built. Then I would say that a marriage that can't survive one partner pursuing their dreams was never a real marriage to begin with. Wesley's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment, I felt sorry for him. He had gotten so comfortable with the power dynamic between us that he couldn't imagine a relationship where we were equals. "I need some air," I said, getting out of bed. "I'm going to sit in the garden for a while." Wesley didn't try to stop me. As I left the bedroom, I could hear him on the phone with someone, probably his brother or one of his medical colleagues, seeking advice on how to handle his suddenly rebellious wife. Outside, the October night was crisp and clear. I sat on my stone bench beneath the oak tree, looking up at stars that seemed brighter somehow than they had in years. In my pocket, Harrison's personal business card seemed to pulse with possibility. I pulled out my phone and stared at his number for a long time before finally typing a text message. "Harrison, I've made my decision. I would like to accept the position you offered. When can we start?" I hit send before I could change my mind. His response came within minutes, despite the late hour. "Sarah, I'm thrilled. Can you meet me at the hospital tomorrow morning at 9? I'll give you a tour of the new wing, introduce you to key staff members. This is going to be wonderful." I smiled, feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades, excitement about my future. "I'll be there," I typed back. As I was putting my phone away, the French doors to the house opened and Elena appeared, wearing a robe and slippers. "Mrs. Hartwell?" I heard voices. "Is everything all right?" Elena had her own small apartment above our garage, but she had always been protective of me in ways that went beyond her job description. More than once over the years, I had suspected she stayed late or came early just to make sure I was okay. "Everything is fine, Elena. Actually, everything is better than fine." I looked at her kind, worried face. "I got a job." Elena's eyes widened. "A job? What kind of job?" "At the hospital. Working with children and their families." Even saying it out loud felt surreal. Elena sat down beside me on the bench, her expression shifting from concern to something like pride. "That's wonderful, Mrs. Hartwell. You'll be so good at that work." "You think so?" "I know so. I've watched you for 15 years. The way you care for people, the way you solve problems, the way you make everything better for everyone around you. Those children will be lucky to have you." Her faith in me was unexpected and deeply moving. "Thank you, Elena. That means more to me than you know." We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Finally, Elena spoke again. "What about Dr. Hartwell? Is he happy about your new job?" I considered how to answer that question honestly. "Dr. Hartwell is concerned about changes to our routine," I said finally. Elena nodded knowingly. Change is hard for some people, especially when they're used to things being a certain way. "Yes, it is." But you know what my grandmother used to say? She said that a bird in a cage might feel safe, but it never learns to fly." Her words hit me with unexpected force. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was, and she would have liked you very much." Elena stood up, pulling her robe tighter against the cool air. "Mrs. Hartwell, if you need anything for your new job, help with clothes or transportation or anything, you just let me know." "Thank you, Elena, for everything." After Elena went back inside, I remained in the garden for another hour, planning my new life. Tomorrow I would tour the hospital, meet the people I would be working with, begin to understand the scope of what I was taking on. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When I finally went back inside, Wesley was lying in bed with his back to me, pretending to be asleep. I got dressed quietly in the bathroom, choosing clothes for my hospital visit, a navy blazer and gray slacks that felt professional without being too formal. As I was leaving the next morning, I found a note from Wesley on the kitchen counter. "Clarissa, I hope you'll reconsider this decision. We have built something beautiful together. Don't let an old fantasy destroy what's real. I folded the note carefully and put it in my purse, not as a keepsake but as a reminder. For 40 years, Wesley had been telling me what was real and what was fantasy. He had convinced me that my dreams were naive, that my capabilities were limited, that my proper place was in the shadows of his life. But as I drove toward the hospital, toward Harrison and the possibility of reclaiming the person I used to be, I realized that the only fantasy had been believing I was meant to live such a small life. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked through the entrance of St. Mary's Medical Center, wearing my navy blazer and carrying a leather portfolio I had found in the back of my closet. I felt nervous and uncertain and more alive than I had in decades. Harrison was waiting for me in the lobby, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Sarah," he said, approaching with a smile that made me feel like anything was possible. "Welcome to your new life." 6 months later, I stood in my new office overlooking the pediatric wing, watching the morning sun stream through windows that had been designed to let in as much natural light as possible. The nameplate on my door read, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Director of Family Advocacy Services, a name that still felt both foreign and completely right every time I saw it. The transition hadn't been easy. Those first weeks had been a whirlwind of learning hospital systems, understanding insurance protocols, and navigating the complex personalities of medical professionals who had initially been skeptical of the doctor's wife, who thought she could run a department. But I had proven them wrong. More importantly, I had proven myself wrong about what I was capable of at 62. The Family Advocacy Center had become exactly what Harrison and I had envisioned. A place where frightened parents could find guidance, where children facing long-term treatment could get educational support, where families dealing with impossible medical decisions could find both practical help and emotional support. Yesterday, I had helped coordinate care for a 7-year-old girl with leukemia, whose family was struggling to navigate treatment options at 3 different hospitals. Last week, I had worked with the social work team to arrange temporary housing for a family whose premature twins needed months of specialized care. This morning, I had a meeting with the Hospital Foundation about expanding our family support programs. It was work that mattered. Work that made a difference. Work that used every skill I had developed over 40 years of managing complex situations, just applied to a purpose larger than maintaining Wesley's comfortable life. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena, who had become not just my housekeeper but one of my closest confidants during the dramatic changes of the past 6 months. "How is the first day of your new life going? Remember to eat lunch. E." I smiled, typing back quickly. "Wonderful and terrifying. Lunch at 12:30, I promise." The divorce papers had been finalized last week. Wesley had fought it initially, hiring an expensive attorney and making threats about what my leaving would cost me financially. But Harrison had quietly connected me with a lawyer who specialized in cases where one spouse had been economically controlled by the other, and we had built a strong case for alimony based on my 40 years of supporting Wesley's career at the expense of my own. The settlement had been fair, enough to ensure my independence without destroying Wesley's finances. More importantly, it had given me the freedom to discover who I was when I wasn't performing the role of Mrs. Wesley Hartwell. The woman I had discovered was someone I liked very much. A soft knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called. Harrison appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of smile that had become familiar over these past months. Proud, affectionate, but careful not to assume more than I was ready to give. "Thought you might need caffeine," he said, setting 1 cup on my desk. "Department heads meeting in 10 minutes. "Right, the quarterly review." I gathered my notes, feeling that familiar flutter of nervousness that came before important meetings. 6 months in, I was no longer afraid of failing catastrophically, but I still felt the weight of responsibility for the families who depended on our services. "How are you feeling about presenting the expansion proposal?" Harrison asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Terrified," I admitted. "But excited. The data is compelling. We've reduced average length of stay by 18%, improved patient satisfaction scores across all pediatric departments, and the family support programs have a waiting list. All of which proves what I knew from the beginning, Harrison said quietly. You were born for this work. Our eyes met across the desk, and I felt that familiar warmth that had been growing between us over these months. It wasn't the desperate passion of 20-somethings, but something deeper. A connection built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the rare gift of being truly seen by another person. We had been careful not to rush into anything romantic. Both of us understood that I needed time to discover who I was outside of marriage before I could consider entering into a new relationship. But there was an understanding between us, an acknowledgement that when I was ready, something beautiful might develop. I should probably head to the meeting, I said, standing and smoothing my skirt, a tailored black piece that made me feel professional and confident. Sarah? Harrison said as I reached for the door. Whatever happens in there, remember that you've already succeeded beyond everyone's wildest expectations, including mine. The department heads meeting went better than I had dared to hope. Dr. Patricia Lennox, who had initially been one of my harshest critics, actually complimented the efficiency of our new family coordination protocols. The chief of staff approved my expansion proposal unanimously, allocating an additional $200,000 for new staff positions and extended hours. As I walked back to my office afterward, I passed by the portrait gallery that lined the hospital's main corridor. Photos of distinguished doctors, generous benefactors, and innovative researchers who had shaped the institution's history. Someday I realized my own photo might hang there, not as someone's wife, but as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had revolutionized family-centered pediatric care. The thought should have seemed presumptuous, but instead it felt like a natural progression of the life I was building. My phone rang as I reached my office. Wesley's name appeared on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. We had spoken only a few times since the divorce was finalized. Brief and carefully polite conversations about dividing household items and closing joint accounts. Hello, Wesley. Clarissa. He still called me by the name he had chosen for me, unable or unwilling to accept my return to Sarah. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. I have a few minutes. What can I do for you? A pause. I was calling to congratulate you, actually. I heard about your expansion proposal being approved. Patricia Lennox mentioned it at a medical society meeting. I was surprised by the genuine warmth in his voice. Thank you. That's unexpected. I know we haven't parted on the best terms, Wesley continued. And I know I made mistakes in our marriage. Big mistakes. But seeing what you've accomplished these past 6 months, I'm proud of you, Clarissa. Really proud. The admission caught me off guard. This was the closest Wesley had ever come to acknowledging that he had been wrong about my capabilities. I appreciate that, Wesley. I know this hasn't been easy for either of us. No, it hasn't. Another pause. For what it's worth, I think I finally understand why you had to leave. I spent 40 years trying to keep you safe from failure, but I never gave you the chance to succeed. The insight was more than I had expected from him, a level of self-awareness that suggested real growth. We both did the best we could with what we knew at the time, I said gently. I don't regret our marriage, Wesley, but I don't regret leaving it either. I hope you're happy. Really happy. I am. For the first time in a very long time, I am. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out at the children's garden that had been part of Harrison's original design. Families moved through the space, parents pushing strollers, siblings playing on specially designed equipment, teenagers sitting together on benches, all of them dealing with the stress of having a sick child, but finding moments of normalcy in this carefully created space. This was what I did now. I created spaces, both literal and metaphorical, where healing could happen not just for patients, but for entire families. A knock on my door brought me back to the present. "Come in." Harrison appeared again, but this time his expression was different, excited, almost nervous. "Do you have dinner plans tonight?" he asked. "Nothing special. Why?" "Because I have something I want to show you. Something I've been working on for a while." Curiosity piqued, I agreed to meet him at 7 o'clock at an address he wrote on a piece of paper. It was in the Arts District, not far from the cafe where we had that first conversation 6 months ago. That evening, I drove through the tree-lined streets of the Arts District, passing galleries and independent shops and restaurants filled with people who looked like they had chosen their own paths. When I reached the address Harrison had given me, I found myself in front of a beautifully restored Victorian house with a small brass plaque beside the front door. Harrison was waiting on the front porch, his expression mixing excitement with something that looked like vulnerability. "What is this place?" I asked, climbing the steps to meet him. "Read the plaque," he said softly. I looked down at the brass nameplate. "The Sarah Thompson Foundation for Medical Education, providing scholarships for students pursuing careers in pediatric medicine." I stared at the plaque, trying to process what I was seeing. "Harrison, what did you do?" "I established a foundation in your name. Your real name." His words came out in a rush, as if he had been rehearsing them. "It will provide full scholarships for students who want to specialize in pediatric medicine, but can't afford medical school. Especially students from underserved communities, first-generation college graduates, people who might otherwise never have the chance." I felt tears building in my eyes. "You used my maiden name. Because that's who you were when you inspired me to believe that medicine could change the world. Sarah Thompson, the brilliant student who believed that healing required both scientific excellence and deep compassion." He opened the front door, revealing a beautiful interior that had been converted into offices and meeting spaces. The walls were lined with photos of medical students, scholarship recipients, and young doctors who were already making a difference in pediatric care. "The foundation has already funded 12 full scholarships," Harrison continued, his voice growing stronger. "4 of those students have completed their residencies and are now practicing pediatric medicine in rural communities that desperately need them." I walked through the space in wonder, reading the stories of young people whose lives had been changed by educational opportunities they never could have afforded otherwise. These were kids like I had been, smart, passionate, determined, but without the financial resources to pursue their dreams. "Harrison, this is incredible. But why my name? Why not your own?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching me explore the space. "Because you taught me something I never forgot, even during the 40 years when I thought I had lost you forever." "What's that?" "That the best way to honor the gifts we've been given is to make sure other people get the same chances we had." His voice grew softer. "And because I wanted to create something that would last long after we're both gone. Something that would keep your spirit alive in the work that mattered most to you." I turned to face him, tears flowing freely now. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me." "Sarah," Harrison said, stepping closer, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said months ago." My heart started beating faster, sensing that we were approaching a moment that would change everything between us. "What is it?" "I love you." Not the 22-year-old student I fell for in medical school, not some idealized memory of who you used to be. I love the woman you are now, strong, compassionate, brilliant, brave enough to rebuild her entire life at 62. His voice was steady, certain. "I love the way you fight for families who can't fight for themselves. I love how you've turned your own painful experience into wisdom that helps other people heal." The words hung between us, beautiful and terrifying, and exactly what I had been hoping to hear for months but hadn't dared to expect. "I love you too," I said, the admission feeling both surprising and inevitable. "I think I started falling for you again the moment you called me Sarah at that gala. You were the first person in 40 years who saw me as I really am, instead of who someone else wanted me to be. Harrison reached for my hands, holding them gently. So what happens now? I smiled, feeling lighter and more hopeful than I had since I was 22 years old. Now we find out what we can build together when both people get to be themselves. He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of possibility. It was a kiss that tasted like second chances, like dreams deferred but not destroyed, like the promise of a future neither of us had dared to imagine. When we finally broke apart, I looked around the foundation office again, at the photos of young doctors, at the mission statement on the wall, at the physical manifestation of Harrison's faith in who I had always been meant to be. There's something I want to add to the foundation, I said. What's that? A mentorship program, pairing scholarship recipients with established doctors who can guide them through medical school and residency. People who can help them navigate the challenges and stay focused on why they wanted to become doctors in the first place. Harrison's face lit up. That's perfect. Do you have someone in mind to run the program? I smiled, feeling the last pieces of my new life clicking into place. Actually, I think I might know just the person. As we left the foundation that night, walking hand in hand down the tree-lined street, I realized that my story wasn't one of revenge or dramatic confrontation. It was something quieter but more powerful. The story of a woman who had spent 40 years believing she was meant to live a small life, only to discover that it's never too late to remember who you really are. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.